Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the show about building a healthier relationship with modern technology. Now here are your hosts, R. Blank and Stephanie Warner.
Today's guest is Natalie Nidham, a holistic nutritionist, epigenetic coach, biohacker, and podcast host. Nat is a self-proclaimed science geek with a passion for human health and is on a mission to inform and inspire her clients and audience to live their best lives. Since learning about peptides and bioregulators, Nat's focus has narrowed as she has learned how these incredible compounds can trigger the body's healing mechanisms and even reverse biological age, which we'll talk about on today's show. Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, Nat.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Oh, it's great having you. Yeah. So just to get us started, can you share a bit of what you think is most relevant in your personal health journey and what made you realize your passion for helping others?
Oh, yeah, great question. I think that, I've always been, like it says in my bio, I've always been into science. I was that kid that read National Geographic cover to cover every time it came in. It was ridiculous. And I studied physiology in university. And then, at some point I kind of got a little bit distracted from that track, but ended up in a corporate world, but always kind of kept a hand in science and in health by being a fitness instructor and just always kind of being fascinated. And I think what really triggered me to kind of get into this is it's funny. I'm kind of like in that world where I was always really healthy and yet always had some really kind of low-lying health issues. Like I had a lot of candida issues because I was a C-section baby. I now know that my microbiome was destroyed very early in life by a lot of antibiotics. And that kind of set me up for some issues in my adult life, which I kind of managed to figure out more or less. But I think what really triggered me is seeing my family members develop chronic health conditions and sitting there thinking, is that where I'm going? Like, is that my path? And, underlying my underlying belief has always been that the body can heal if we get out of the way, if we give it what it needs. And so I think that's what kind of kept that curiosity door open all the time. And eventually I left the corporate world when I was having a conversation with my chiropractor and downloading yet another one of these crazy books I'd been reading. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, Nat, you should be getting paid to do this because I've been sharing your information with my patients and a couple of them done really well with it. And it's like a light bulb went off in my head. And within a week, I'd quit my job, registered at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition here in Toronto and started a full-time in-class journey that's led me to where I am today.
And how long ago was that?
That was about 10 years ago.
Okay. Wow. That's not only a cool journey, you really covered it really, really effectively. So I thank you very much. And I might come back to some of what you just talked about, but one thing I was reading about you, and I wanted to get right to it, is that as of today, your biological age is a full 14 years younger than your chronological age, and your telomeres match someone 23 years younger, right? Mm-hmm. So that's impressive. I want to get into that. But first, how do you measure that?
So the interesting thing, in the last 5 years, there's been such an explosion in the technology and in making it affordable for people to do, right? I would guess that 10 years ago, if you could even measure these things, it would have been psychotically expensive. So there are a few providers out there now who will actually I'm trying to remember if they use blood or saliva, but depending on the provider, they'll use blood or saliva, and they will actually the DNA methylation number, which is the 14-year younger, that's using the Horvath clock. That's a provider by the name of True Diagnostic who runs that test. And they actually also can estimate your telomere age. And then the other thing that they can do is they can estimate your pace of aging. And so how fast are you aging relative to the time clock that we've established, right? The times around the sun, however you want to define that. And so, obviously what we're looking for is a pace of aging less than 1. And I think my pace of aging last time we looked at it was maybe around somewhere between 0.75 or 0.8. So that means for every year, I'm aging only 3/4 of that.
That's amazing. So how did you achieve that?
So, I think it's multifactorial. I think it's really important to understand that your lifestyle choices have a massive impact on your pace of aging. Your pace of aging is also very impacted by stress, and in particular stress that you may have suffered as a child or been subjected to as a child. And they have some really interesting studies around that, and I wouldn't do it justice, so I don't want to get into too much detail on this. But basically, they did some really interesting studies, and I think it was in New Zealand, where they followed a bunch of small, little, tiny children until they became adults, and they were able to correlate their pace of aging to their early childhood experiences. So in our circles, we will often talk about early childhood adverse events. Sorry if I look distracted. There's a ginormous bug on my wall coming back. So it is really amazing that, people will talk about how stress kills, and we don't very often pay that much attention to stress and lifestyle factors like drinking and exercise, getting outside. And I would actually put in lifestyle exposure to toxins, which includes EMFs and all of the things that you talk about. I think that at a foundation level, those things are massively important. And then the other thing I would say that comes into play for me is probably my genetics are helpful, because if I look at my parents, they're in their 80s. They're not biohackers. Well, they are now, but they weren't biohackers most of their lives. My poor parents. They weren't biohackers for most of their lives. And yet both my parents still work full time. Like they're both, and you would never in a million years guess that they're in their 80s, even if you look at the way that they walk, right? So gait can be a really interesting measure of a person's, how vibrant they are. So there's all that. And then have I been playing with bioregulators for the last couple of years? Yes, but probably not long enough to be the major factor in this.
Okay.
Right. I don't know. Actually, I'll take that back, because there is one bioregulator in particular that can activate telomerase, which is the enzyme that helps to maintain telomere length. And that's probably the one that I've been using most regularly for the last 2 years. And you can see.
Sure.
Those...
So wait, before you get further there, you had this big word there, right? Bioregulator. Can you start by defining a bioregulator?
Yeah. So, sorry. So a bioregulator is a peptide. It's a very, very tiny peptide. So a peptide by definition is a protein, right? Our bodies are made up of proteins. We eat protein, but these are protein. The building blocks of proteins are what we refer to as amino acids. So they're think of them as the little single Lego blocks, right? And so a protein can be composed of anywhere from 2 to 1,000, if not longer, Lego blocks. And in our body, we have like thousands of these. The bigger, longer ones are folded up in very specific patterns so that they can act on different systems in the body. A bioregulator peptide is by definition no more than 4 amino acids long. So it is the tiniest of the tiniest peptides. And what it is able to do is, because of its size and because of the electric charge that it carries, like the configuration that things are organized in, it has the capacity to cross through a cellular membrane, which is of your cell. So that's the wall of your cell, cross through the nuclear membrane, which is the wall of the nucleus. And inside that nucleus is your DNA. It's your genetic material. It is then able to bind to the genetic material and upregulate the regeneration and restoration of tissue and even function. So the one that I mentioned a second ago, called Epitalon, is the pineal gland bioregulator. So it is what I will often talk about as my desert island bioregulator. If you put me on a desert island and said, Nat, you get to wet one bioregulator, I would say, okay, it's kind of like asking me to pick my favorite child, but I'm going to pick Epitalon, because Epitalon it helps to rejuvenate and restore function to the pineal gland, which is a tiny little pine nut shaped gland in your brain, which regulates, number one, your circadian rhythm. It helps to normalize melatonin production. It activates telomerase, but even maybe overpowering all of that, it is your master endocrine regulator. So your endocrine system being your hormonal system. So it helps to restore balance, if you will, to the endocrine system.
So, and how long have you been working? I mean, you said you made this shift about 10 years ago, at least professionally. How long have you been exploring or working with these bioregulator peptides?
So the bioregulators and then the other peptides, I would say I've been I've been like kind of buried in those for the last 2.5 years.
Okay. And are they new, or like this concept, or did you just kind of stumble upon them more recently?
Yeah, I stumbled upon them more recently. They're not new. The bioregulators in particular have been being researched very heavily in Russia for the last almost 40 years now, I would say.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
the gentleman who's really at the forefront of this research and who you could say discovered them and has brought them into use would be a doctor by the name of Vladimir Kavinson. And so we will often talk about the Kavinson bioregulator peptides.
Okay. And if one of my listeners is very intrigued by this, as I am, right? You could have some protein and alter your telomeres. How would you recommend someone get started? Like, who do they talk to learn about what they might want to experiment with, and how much of it to take, and so on?
Right. So there's a couple of ways to go there. I run a large Facebook community called the Optimizing Superhuman Performance. And so I think I think we're closing in on 12,500 people in there right now. So that's a beehive of activity around a lot of things, kind of longevity based. But I would say that the bioregulators and other peptides are a big, big part of the discussion in there. I also, on the podcast, if it's okay, I mean,
yeah.
So on the Biohacking Superhuman Performance podcast, I've interviewed a number of people because, of course, the reason why I started the podcast in the first place was to get people who knew more about this stuff to talk to me about it. It was kind of like, okay, how am I going to get all these guys to talk to me? It's like, I know, I'll start a podcast.
Right.
And then, so in the there are now a number of episodes in the podcast, but I would say if you just wanted to kind of deep dive, you would listen to episode 42 or 46 or even 47 of the podcast, because those three really only talk about the Kavinson peptide bioregulators. And we talk about them at quite length. The gentleman I'm talking about, speaking with in that podcast, in the first two, is a researcher by the name of Bill Lawrence, who is actually conducting a clinical trial right now, which I'm a part of, where he's taking us through. We're using bioregulators every single month. So any given month, I'm using anywhere from 8 to 9 bioregulators. I'm cycling through them, and in an effort to see how this will affect my biological age even further. But those episodes,
and we'll link to all 3 of those episodes in the show notes.
Okay.
Is this the kind of thing that you can kind of be a dilettante about and say, oh, I should try to add these to my diet, or do you really need to take a biohacking approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to interrupt a little because I need to take a step back a little bit. So you did such a wonderful job explaining what the peptides are, and I did not know. So thank you for that really great explanation. But are these things that exist, this proteins already exist in our body, how are you stimulating or activating them? Is it a supplement? Is it nutrition? How are you, optimizing those specific regulators?
That's such a great question, because as I'm sitting here talking, like I breathe this stuff, right? So it's like you leave out these little key bits of information.
Yeah, I was letting you know because I was like, oh, wait, what? I need to fill in that one part, because if I'm wondering, I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering too.
Yeah, for sure. So 2 things. You also asked, is the other way that people can learn more about them. I do offer consults, and then I'm also at some point going to push a course out there in the world. So if people sign up for my newsletter on the website, then they'll be the first to know. And I'm under so much pressure to produce this course. It is coming. It's going to happen. So that's number 1. Number 2, to answer your question, Stephanie, which is brilliant, is so here's what's interesting about the bioregulators is we can get them from food. Right. And so they are
I eat food. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But the thing is, here's the tricky thing. They are present in food, but like anything else, to get therapeutic doses of something, to really move the needle, you're going to have to access a very concentrated source. So let's talk about the hierarchy of sources that we have and how concentrated they are. The first layer would be organ meats, right? So think about this. Where are we going to get a pineal bioregulator from? We're going to get it from the pineal gland. There's a kidney bioregulator. We're going to get it from eating kidneys. There's liver, there's heart, there's like 21 of these. So think of different organs and systems. And that's where we're going to find these bioregulators. Bioregulators can be taken in two ways: orally, well, actually now more ways, but let's say there are oral biologic bioregulators, and then there are the synthetic ones where they've isolated that 2 to 4 amino acid chain and it's been reproduced in a lab synthetically. And those ones can either be sprayed into the mouth, they can be injected subcutaneously. So that's just like an insulin injection into, let's say, belly fat. And so you've got these two kind of different sources. So really what you're doing is you're taking a source and you're reintroducing it to the body, but in a therapeutic dose. So we have the food, right? So eating it. So I actually think a lot of the people in the carnivore community who are getting really transformative health benefits, quite apart from letting go of some really bad lifestyle and diet habits that got them there in the first place, if they're doing a true carnivore diet and eating nose to tail, they are actually accessing those bioregulators, right?
Right.
Our next layer would be the dehydrated organ supplements that a lot of these guys are producing. So like Heart and Soil by Paul Saladino or Ancestral Supplements. What they've done is they've taken those bits and bobs that nobody really wants to eat. Right. Right. How many people have you, I mean, I know people who love liver. I like liver, but most people don't like liver or they don't want to eat it all the time because it's not convenient. And then there's heart, and then there's all these other pieces, right? So the next layer would be those dehydrated organ supplements. To take it up another notch, we now get to the biological oral supplements. So there's a company in the UK, there's an online store in the UK called Profound Health. And if you went to profound-health.com, you would be able to find all of the Cavinson bioregulators in the white box with the Russian writing on it. But what Profound Health has done is they've taken it another level and they've created a new brand called Nature's Marvels, which is way less scary. It's got pretty flowers and fields on pictures on it. And it doesn't use the crazy names that these bioregulators have. So this nomenclature about bioregulators is crazy. There's like Epidolon on its own can be Epidolon, it can be endolutin, it can have epithalamin, like there's all these different names for it. What Nature's Marvels has done is they've said, oh, we're going to call this the pineal gland bioregulator.
Right. That's helpful.
There's an idea, right? And actually, if you go to my website, we have a discount code for people's first order if they want to do that. So you asked if somebody could just go out and buy bioregulators and get started. I mean, there's certain rules of thumb, but here's the interesting thing about a bioregulator, and that's the word regulation that is embedded in there. And that what the bioregulator seeks to do is to restore balance to the body. It's not going to push you into overdrive, right? So let's say we have someone who has an imbalance in their thyroid gland. We can give them the thyroid bioregulator, and we don't have to worry whether they're hyper or hypothyroid, whether they're overproducing or underperforming, because what the bioregulator is going to try and do is bring back the balance. So it's really, they're very unique in that sense. And that's part of why they are seen as being extremely safe. Now, I will say that if you want to get your bang for your buck, you're going to want to do two things. Number one, very often bioregulators are almost never used on their own. So if I want to stay, let's say I want to address, I want to help a woman to reestablish some balance in her reproductive system, right? I will use Epidolon because it's our master endocrine regulator. I will also use the ovarian bioregulator. And I might also use the blood vessel bioregulator because, of course, if we can optimize the delivery of nutrients and the removal of waste at a cellular level in the body, we're always doing something to upregulate, right? But there's two other things we have to make sure we're taking care of. Number one is, why is the imbalance there? Are we addressing it? Is she being exposed to a lot of non-native VMFs? Is she being exposed to a lot of xenoestrogens? Is she being exposed? Are there toxins? What is the driver for the imbalance in the first place? That has to be addressed. And then the second one is, what are the nutrients and other things that we can be doing to help to support the system at the same time? So the bioregulators sound like the magic wand silver bullet, but they're not. They work really well. And if you look at a lot of the research, they work really well as an adjunct to conventional therapies when there's serious imbalances. But when we're optimizing, we can use them in cycles and periodically, if you will, kind of like to address the wear and tear that our bodies sustain as we age and go through life.
So and thank you for that explanation. This is all, it's new information to me, and you do a fantastic job of covering it.
Thank you.
So far in the discussion, at least at a few points, tech has come up, maybe implicitly. And so, for instance, we talked about measuring biological age. That sounded like those were some pretty significant technological advancements that allow that to happen affordably. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you talked about forces like toxins and stress contributing to reductions in biological age. And we all know that tech is a source of both toxin and stress. Mm-hmm. So, and you and I have chatted before. And so our relationship with tech, let's say, requires us to kind of balance a fine line. And I was wondering if you could give a little more context to how you view that fine line in our relationship with technology.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think it's something that we're always negotiating in our world, right? And I mean, because at some level now we're in a position where, and I don't even know that there's too many places on the planet where you could not be exposed to non-native VMFs or 5G.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Like, we're getting to the point now where you almost can't get away from it. But, before I talk about that, I think one of the things that's really important to know is that tech can be our friend and tech can be our enemy, right? And as biohackers, as people who are constantly we want to gather data about our bodies. We want to understand what is the effect of let's say, taking a Pidilon on my deep sleep. So I could be wearing an Oura ring, or I could be wearing a BioStrap at night. And so balancing the exposure, let's say, and it's very small amounts of EMF, but if we think about it, the cumulative effect of all the EMFs, I think it's something that we all have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I believe that, number one, you have great tools on your website that help to mitigate some of those impacts, right? Like, mm-hmm. That little platform
or the laptop. Yeah, I think you're talking about the laptop.
Laptop, it's like my favorite thing. You throw it in travel with it. It's like the best thing ever. And it's a small thing, right? And yet it's a piece. Wearing blue blocking glasses during the day just to limit. There was an article that just came out in some journal where they were finally saying, oh, guess what? Exposure to artificial blue light will contribute to neurodegenerative diseases and to accelerated aging. I'm like, okay. And this was done on fruit flies. So it's going to take them another 20 years to come out and say that has that effect on people.
I wonder how they got little blue light glasses on the flies, but
all they did is they exposed them to blue light and how it accelerated their aging.
Yeah.
I guess fly in circles or fly into the walls. I don't know how you neurodegeneration in fruit flies, but all I say, they figured that they're finally coming out and saying that, right?
Yep.
So I think that tech is, at this point, it's inescapable, and it's what we do. It's all of the actions that we can take to, number one, limit our exposure where we can. I also, I have a light bulb in my lamp right here that emits no blue light. So there are tools available to us now that can help us to manage these things. There's, on the wearable tech, I don't wear my BioStrap during the day. I don't need to. It measures my sleep. Frankly, I don't even need to be wearing my Oura. I just don't necessarily remember to take it off. So it's just about finding the lines. Now, the other interesting thing about the bioregulators is there are a couple, and I think Epidolon may be one of them, and there may be another one called Vylon that may have protective effects against things like radiation. So they're used quite often in cancer patients who've had radiation therapy to help with the repair of DNA.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually writing that down. It's very interesting.
And, and then there's some supplements like molecular hydrogen that can help to mitigate the effects of radiation. So I think the first step, like anything else, is to do what you can to reduce your exposure. And you've got, I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but you have a full day coming out where you're educating people on
EMF Radiation Safety Day. This podcast I think will have aired by then, but it will have aired after that day, but anyway, as a company, you guys have really gotten your arms around this, right? So helping people to understand what are the things that you can control, that you can affect. And then in the things that you can't control is so that it gives you enough wiggle room for the things you can't control. And then we do that in everything, right? We do that in diet. We do that in lifestyle. We do that like in diet. The idea is not to eat the perfect diet every minute of every hour of every day. I mean, that would be great, but for most of us, that's not achievable. The idea is to do it enough that time that you're faced with that thing that oh, it's not good for me, but you can kind of release that because you've built resilience into your body. Right.
Yeah, it sounds like it sounds a lot like your fine line is more mindful use of the tech that you have. So maybe limiting the use of things you don't that aren't really helping. So if you're using your Oura ring or you're using your what did you call it, the BioStrap at night? Yeah. Like there's a clear benefit to that data and to using that. Whereas maybe there are other places you could reduce usage of things that perhaps don't give you as much value. That's what I was hearing.
No, that's great. And so I was actually hoping, and that's a great segue, Steph. Oura rings, I'm always asked about Oura rings. The BioStrap, I don't think I've heard of. I was hoping to take this opportunity to ask you, what are some of your favorite tech tools for biohacking?
So obviously the BioStrap for me is one of my most favorite because it's kind of like the tough sleep coach, right? So Oura, for whatever reason, always thinks I've done a good job at my sleep. Almost. I really have to mess it up. I really have to do something crazy for it to say, really, you could have done better.
Judgy tech. I like that.
Yeah. So BioStrap is way judgier.
Yeah.
BioStrap is much tougher to
please. That honest friend you only tell a little bit to.
Yeah. This is the honest friend. You got to be like, okay, do I really want to know the answer to do these?
Okay, so I only ate one piece of cake, but maybe two, but I won't tell her that.
Exactly. So BioStrap, Oura's definitely made a lot of changes to their algorithms these days, and I don't want to get into too much of a comparison, but at the end of the day, either one of these tools that resonates for you, I think is a great way to see what is the effect of the decisions that I make on my sleep. So whatever that may be for you. What other tech? I mean, look, red light, infrared light devices, I think are really, really powerful for human health. The trick there is to find a device that's low in EMF. And that is so that the benefits, the negatives don't outweigh the benefits kind of thing. Again, with saunas, we want to be careful with those but there's so many great options on the market now with every passing day. I think a great investment that people can make is like their own EMF meter.
Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
Because people send me stuff all the time and they're like, oh yeah, it's really low EMF. It's really great. And I hold my meter and I'm like, yeah, really? I don't know, maybe. I do think that we always have to ask ourselves when we're being faced with biohacking tech is, do I need this? Because there's so many cool stuff out there, so many cool things, right? And they're all going to expose you to some degree. Now, the other interesting thing is I think that some people are way more sensitive, where they can tell. I'm not that person. Now, let me rephrase that. I never used to think I was affected by EMFs at all, except for that one time that I was speaking at an event that was in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere, where there was literally no phone reception. It's probably one of the last places on the planet you can go and experience that. And I was sleeping on a crappy cot in a cold tent, and it was raining and it was cold. Like the first night was really kind of epic. My sleep score that night and recovery score, I don't think to this day I've ever seen anything better.
Wow. So that's a great example, actually. So short of going out into the middle of nowhere, how do you disconnect from technology or disengage from technology in your life? How often do you do that, and how do you do it?
Yeah, I have to admit that I haven't found the perfect solution to that, right? So we do have a cottage by a lake, but it has electricity. So it's going to have, it's imperfect. I can see, if I turn on my phone, I can see 8 different Wi-Fi networks.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I want to believe that I'm disconnected, but I'm not. So I turn off whatever I can at night.
Every night?
Yeah. As much as I can. The Wi-Fi in my house is almost impossible to turn off. So I just make sure that everything in my bedroom is off. There is no TV in my bedroom. There never has been. There never will be. I think, I just I'm like, that is so easy. That's such an easy win. If things are on, they're on airplane mode. And even then, I feel like, I've kind of struck a deal here, because I sometimes will use an audio track from an app that I have that helps with deep sleep, and it really materially impacts my deep sleep. So I'm like, is having Bluetooth on, does it get balanced by the amount of deep sleep I'm getting? Maybe sometimes. So I use it sometimes, and other times no, but the Wi-Fi is definitely off. The cellular data's off. Like it's for me, it's just this constant negotiation, right? Mm-hmm. And then ironically, there are sometimes technology solutions to technology problems. And so, like we go to your website and we find solutions to the problems. So it's really about this constant exploration of what's available to me, and do I really need this?
I love that question. I think that's probably the most important question is, do I need this? Because there's tech that definitely serves a purpose and helps us in our health journey. And then there's the other stuff that's we just have it around us. And if we just think about what's around us, what can we turn off? That's a huge step forward. And so kind of want to segue back to your work. And we always like to ask this question. So for our listeners, and personally for myself too, because I'm so intrigued by what you do, what advice would you give our listeners and myself to begin their journey to a healthier lifestyle? Look, I'm always one to start with the basics, right? I think that addressing and going back to what we were talking about earlier, what can you do to balance your nervous system? Which is another way of saying build resilience to stress, because, stress, we're all exposed to stress. You can't draw a breath in this world that we live in right now and not get stressed about something. Yeah. So whether it's a mindful meditation, or whether it's breath work, whatever it is that helps you to buffer the stressors that you're impacted by, will be the single most important thing that you can do. And I say that even before nutrition, because your stress levels are going to impact your nutrition. They're going to impact the food choices that you make. They're going to impact your ability to digest your food, right? I would say on the same level, and probably falls into the stress management bucket as well, is exposure to nature, right? So the antidote to tech is nature. And getting outside, getting into seeing natural light every morning, trying to watch the sunset, stepping outside the door in the middle of the day to just recenter yourself and reground yourself. If you have access to a patch of grass, feet in the ground, just try to access to nature. For me, we have our lake house in the spring, summer, and fall. Just getting there
is a massive, like, I don't wear shoes the whole time I'm there. I just, it takes a couple of days to kind of acclimatize my feet at the beginning of the season. But just getting in contact with nature is the next big thing. And then we bring in the supplements, then we bring in all the other stuff, because until we've got that stress, sleep, movement, and I guess movement and exercise, to me, it's kind of part of nature, because you're taking care of your nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So and thank you for giving the focus, because we talked about a lot of things and it can feel a little overwhelming. So I love the focus on the basics, which is really nervous system. And I love how you articulated that, and then increasing our connection with nature. I'm a huge fan of that. So, and it has made a ton of difference in my stress level, just going outside before I start working. That's huge for me. And then supplementation, which is kind of brings me into my last question, which is, if our listeners want to go a little deeper and they want to delve into the work that you do, how would they connect with you? What would be the best way to connect and maybe work with you or hear more about the work that you do and understand more?
Thank you. So like I said earlier, the Facebook community, which, is, it's still there at Facebook's, as much as Facebook's discretion. Yes. So I probably I'll be creating a paid community in the next little while. It won't be expensive, but I'm going to have to make it paid to take it offline and take it into a place where we can actually have conversations.
Free conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the Facebook group for now, which is Optimizing Superhuman Performance. There's my website, natnidham.com, which people can reach out to me through. They can book consults through there. They can only really book an intro consult. The full consult, I need to know what people are looking for before I'm going to take their full money for a full consult, because sometimes, it's outside my wheelhouse. So I'll try and refer them out if I can. There's the podcast, of course. And then at some point, if they sign up for my newsletter, they'll hear about the course when it comes out.
Great. And we'll put the links to all of those in the show notes. Nat, thank you so much. This has been not only very informative and educational, but a super pleasure on this morning to chat with you.
Oh, well, likewise. You guys are great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks
for being here. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in the show. Please like and subscribe to the Healthier Tech Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Get your free quick start guide to building a healthier relationship with technology and our latest information at healthiertech.co.